Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
Welcome to another episode of the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. And we welcome in a luminary from the Football Championship Subdivision media world and a longtime colleague and acquaintance and friend of mine, Sam Herder of Hero Sports, was kind enough to join us, frankly, on short notice. And I've been honest and upfront with Sam. I don't mean to say that this was a desperation move, but I'm just going to be honest and say that I took about 4 days off over the Memorial Day weekend, and I completely checked out for 4 days, which I rarely do. And so I kind of got back to work yesterday and said, I need to do a podcast this week. I haven't done a sports one for a while. Matt Zimmer's writing about me down in Sioux Falls. I guess I could have called Zimmer, but instead we gave Sam Herder the opportunity to come on and BS about the state of FCS, the state of conference alignment in FCS, which might be changing as we're recording this at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning on May 29th. And just kind of BS with Sam for a half hour, 45 minutes. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing good. I'm excited to join the podcast. I know we often, me and you, talk about the state of the FCS and all that, and we differ on some things. We're in the same boat on some other things, and so I always look forward to these type of conversations.
Yeah, and I view you, and you have a job to cover all the FCS as a subdivision, and you have a pretty balanced look, I think. And I know that you, as all of us in the media do, you take some heat because you sometimes throw opinions out there that don't jibe with fan bases or coaching staffs or other media, which is odd to me that other media would get upset with somebody's opinion, but that's the world in which we live. But I think you and I agree more than we disagree, which that doesn't matter. But I think that you and I sort of kind of see the bigger landscape through a similar lens, even if we maybe differ on how, in my case, I think the local school that I cover, North Dakota State, should resolve some of the issues. I think you sort of see some of the big picture things that I do too. Maybe the end game for us differ a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, I think oftentimes too, it's maybe how we phrase things. I think both of us are kind of getting at the same point, but sometimes it's how we phrase things where we'll get into it more. Where the state of the FCS, it's not exactly thriving right now. There's some things that are good. There's obviously a lot of things that are not good. But then sometimes I'll phrase it like the FCS is still going to be fine. Like it could lose its top 25 teams next year, and the FCS is still going to be fine. As in, it's still going to keep on being a subdivision. But some people hang on to me saying it's gonna be fine as if I'm saying, no, everything's fine, no big deal. But like it's kind of a phrasing thing and how people read into certain phrasings, I guess.
So what is the state of the FCS? Give you're now the commissioner of FCS. I've just named you that right now at this moment at 10:05 on Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. As commissioner of the FCS, what is the state of the union?
Well, I think there are things about the FCS that have gotten better over, compared to 10 years ago. I think, facilities wise in the FCS has gotten better. I think coverage wise in the FCS has gotten better. Just Hero Sports traffic alone, just speaking about us. Last fall, we shattered page views records in analytics and all that. And so interest in the FCS seems like it's at an all-time high. I think talent level in the FCS is arguably as good as it's ever been, via the transfer portal. Obviously, the FCS loses a lot of guys to the transfer portal, but there's also a lot of drop downs. And I've heard numerous coaches say they've never been able to recruit a higher level athlete out of high school because all the FBS programs are focusing half their scholarships on the transfer portal. So I think all that is a positive, but the negatives, in my opinion, outweigh all those positives. And that's obviously a lot of brand FCS names have now gone up to the FBS, and that is a natural progression of Division I football. Teams move up, teams move in, and so that's nothing new. Obviously, FCS to FBS move ups, but at some point, when you lose 2-3 brand names every few years, at some point we get to a point like we are now where you kind of look around and go, okay, how many Division I FCS schools are truly invested in FCS football? You can probably count that on one hand, maybe two hands if you're being generous. And so I think that is kind of where we're at now. Is the FCS is not necessarily thriving and in a great spot, but also to balance it out, it's not in, you know, a desperate spot where everything's on fire. It's a sinking ship. I think that is a little drastic because there still is 130 teams, in the FCS, and so I think numbers wise, it's healthy. And I also think this could be a different discussion. But if you take out the top 4 teams that we all know, North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State, I think this high arching viewpoint of the FCS kind of changes because that resets the bar a little bit of what the FCS, but because it is so top heavy, we have this discussion of, what is the FCS? Is it just a regional thing now with the same 4 teams playing at the end of the season?
And you've covered this about as long as I have. Maybe I've been around a little bit longer just because North Dakota State went FCS in whatever it was, 2008 or 2009, whatever it was. Actually declared Division I in 2003. Started a Division I schedule in 2004, became eligible for the playoffs in 2008 or 9, I believe. And we know that there's the North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State are the 4 clear best programs in FCS. And I would suspect that as long as things stay the way they are, we're generally going to see those 4 teams battling for Frisco every year. Hell, with the new playoff format, and I think that's an improvement as well, that they're going to change the playoff format to be a more national playoffs as well. To your point, that there has been some improvements. But so I think like this going into this fall, I saw your top 25 ratings. You had, I think South Dakota State, North Dakota State, Montana, and Montana State as your top 4 teams.
Yep.
I don't think anybody reasonable would disagree with that. Is that any different than it was back in the old days? Because part of, in the old days being 10 to 15 years ago, because, part of I'm a naturally, cynical, glass half empty guy anyway, as you know, but I look at FCS and go, it just doesn't excite me to know that those same 4 teams could be in the semifinals like 5 years in a row, especially with the way the new playoffs are set up. You get out of the regionality where, South Dakota State and North Dakota State aren't going to have to play each other in the second round like they used to have to do. Montana State's not going to have to come to South Dakota State in the second round like they used to have to do, presumably. Is that different than it used to be? Because I tend to look back and go, God, there used to be James Madison and, Sam Houston, even though they, routinely got pounded pretty hard once they advanced deep in the playoffs. There used to be Appalachian State. It just seemed like there was maybe more opportunity for teams to win. And it's just sort of the fact that NDSU was so good for so many years that kind of kept it from being more of a mix. Now it seems like it's going to be those 4 teams. And maybe once in a while there's going to be a team that steps up and has a year like Incarnate Word did a couple of years ago. They had an outstanding quarterback and a bunch of good transfers and a bunch of athletes. But I just don't see a Southern Conference team or a CAA team or a Southland team becoming a power like maybe like they used to be back in the day. The Southern Conference, God, used to have Georgia Southern, Appalachian State. I mean, it used to be loaded. I just don't see those teams. And so that's kind of what has me down about the FCS is it's going to be the same 4 teams in the semifinals and maybe the same 3 or 4 teams in Frisco every single year.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is it's going to be 3, if not all 4 of the teams we just named in the semifinals every year. But I think there's usually going to be a 4th team somewhere that rises up to challenge those 4 teams. Like UIW 2 years ago was every bit as good as NDSU. Furman last year was every bit as good as Montana. So I think we're going to see teams rise up, one team rise up, every year to at least challenge those top 4 teams that we've mentioned. But UIW, after one good season, they get gutted by the transfer portal. They lose their head coach. Furman's rise kind of came with a bunch of seniors that are now gone. And so I think UAlbany, got absolutely blitzed by the transfer portal. So I think sustaining that success for these programs is going to be difficult, but there's always going to be one team that maybe rises up. Maybe it's Chattanooga this year or Western Carolina. They have a really good year, then they fall back. I think the top heaviness now in the FCS, that wasn't the case in the 2000s. I'll be honest, I didn't start covering the FCS until 2012. That was when I was a student at North Dakota State, so that's kind of how I got into the FCS realm. But just talking to people, I know in the 2000s, winning a national title in the 2000s is a lot different than it is now. The bar to win a title back then was basically you have to hit on a couple of good recruiting classes. Then when they're all juniors and seniors, you kind of get hot, and whoever the hottest team was in the playoffs in the 2000s usually went on to win it. I think in like 2014, I remember that being a really good parity year in the brackets. I mean, you had NDSU, Illinois State, Coastal Carolina, New Hampshire, Eastern Washington, South Dakota State. Like those were 7 good teams that were all probably good enough to win the national title in 2014. But since then, it's been top heavy. And I guess glass half full is there's technically more parity now than in like 2017, 2018, because in that range, it was NDSU versus one other team, and then one team would rise up. So it would usually be NDSU versus JMU, and then South Dakota State would rise up, or Eastern Washington would rise up. But really, it was a two team race back in like 2017, 2018. Now there's only maybe 4 teams who could realistically win a national title, which is very low in a 130 team subdivision, right. But it's technically more than it was in 2013 or in like 2018, 2019 range. And so I guess we're getting a little more parity now because Montana State has they both risen up.
They've gotten
but
better,
now we need more teams. Like we need an Idaho to keep on getting better. Villanova, Tarleton has potential. We need more teams to have some more parity in the playoffs.
Well, and the other thing I think that's hurt FCS too is that a couple of traditional programs haven't left FCS, but they're just not as good. They haven't been able to sustain. Northern Iowa was frankly what North Dakota State wanted to be back when North Dakota State, before they'd won a national championship, the Bison went down to Cedar Falls like in 2006 or 7. And just got hammered. I mean, the physical difference between Northern Iowa and North Dakota State back in those days was like, woof, not even close. And Craig Bohl said, we need to look like what they look like. Northern Iowa, just with the financial problems they have, I mean, they're just not going to be what they were, and they really haven't. I mean, the 2015 Northern Iowa team could have won a national championship. NDSU beat them in an incredible game at the Fargo Dome. And NDSU coaches later told me, we thought that if we didn't win that game, that Northern Iowa was going to go on to win the national championship with David Johnson and Aaron Bailey and all these guys. So Northern Iowa has kind of dropped down and become, above average at best. Eastern Washington there had a run where they were just incredible. And they won a national championship in 2010, and they got back to the title game in 2018, I think, against North Dakota State. But Eastern Washington I don't see them necessarily rising up again because they have budget problems and they're running on a shoestring, and they kind of always punched above their weight anyway. But those are 2 teams that I just don't ever see sort of rising back up to be true contenders for national championship. And that, maybe that always happens. I don't know. I mean, North Dakota State has taken a half step back or a step back from where they were at their peak a few years ago. I don't know that South Dakota State's going to maintain the level that they did last year. I mean, that team last year was probably a historically good FCS team in Brookings. They're going to take a relative step back this year, even though they still might win a national championship. And so it's, that's kind of playing into it to me too. And maybe that's my old man in me thinking, God, Northern Iowa used to really be great. And now they haven't beat NDSU in like 15 years. And so maybe, I just don't see, Tarleton, we all know has, Texas A&M system money, but they really haven't done much. North Dakota seems to have plateaued. South Dakota rose up last year, but they won a bunch of close games. And when it came down to it in the playoffs, NDSU just bulldozed them in Vermilion. So how good are they really? And sort of that sort of adds to my pessimism, my naturally pessimistic nature. That's kind of where I stand, just looking at that. There's also some teams that have dropped down as well.
Yeah, I think there's several teams similar to Northern Iowa and Eastern Washington, ones that do have tradition of success in the FCS that have dropped off. And that goes back to what I was saying of the bar to compete at a national title level is so much different now than even in 2013, with facilities and cost of attendance and NIL and how much you're paying your assistant coaches. It seems like Northern Iowa loses 3 of their best assistant coaches every year. Strength and conditioning staff. The top programs have Jim Kramer, obviously at North Dakota State. They have a guy who's just focused on football. A lot of FCS teams, their football strength and conditioning guy usually works with the baseball team or the basketball team. And so just that level of funding is what it takes to win at a high level. And I've heard some people say that like the FCS is just looking like D2 now. I think that's exaggerated, because there's still a lot of teams in this subdivision that are frankly FCS lifers. And if you go and look at the FCS playoff bracket from 1988 and 1995 and 2001, there's a lot of teams in those quarterfinals and semifinals that are still around. They've just dropped off. And I did a story in May of 2022, and the headline was 13 FCS programs who can step up their play in the 2020s. Basically talking about what we're talking about now is the top heaviness who can step up. And the teams I named: Chattanooga, Delaware, who's now gone, Eastern Kentucky, Idaho, McNeese, Missouri State, they're also gone now, New Hampshire, North Carolina A&T, Stephen F. Austin, Tarleton State, UC Davis, Villanova, Youngstown State. Those are all teams that have either a lot of success in the FCS, or they have the kind of the, like UC Davis, kind of has the financial backing to be a lot better. Same thing with Sac State, that they have the financial backing to be a lot better. So there's programs with potential to not make the FCS so top heavy. It's, again, just the bar to win is so high right now that how many teams have the funding in place to reach that bar is very, very slim.
What's going to be interesting too, moving forward for FCS, is the North Dakota State clearly had the Carson Wentzes and the Brock Jensens and the Christian Watsons, the skill position guys that stood out and got drafted high and are in the NFL. Where NDSU made its money, so to speak, all those years was that it dominated the line of scrimmage. Offensive linemen. The 2019 team had like 6 guys on it that ended up in the NFL who played on the offensive line for one FCS team, for God's sakes. The defensive lines of North Dakota State dominated. Nobody could run on the Bison because they didn't have to blitz, because they dominated up front. The transfer portal is changing that situation for a lot of FCS teams, and it's going to hit NDSU eventually. It's going to hit SDSU eventually. NDSU has lost skill position players and cornerbacks, but it really hasn't lost a lot of offensive linemen or defensive linemen that move up to an FBS program. It's had kids leave. There's always attrition, but it hasn't lost its stars to the portal. That at some point is going to change. North Dakota locally here, 75 miles away, lost its 2 best offensive linemen to the transfer portal, and a third as well went. So that, 3 returning starters left in the transfer portal. I don't know how you recover from that at an FCS school. And so that's another sort of an equalizer down the road. And another reason why I don't think South Dakota State's got it rolling right now, and they've won 2 in a row. They might win 3 in a row this year. I don't know if there's ever going to be a team that wins 8 of 9 like NDSU did over that stretch, or 9 of 10 or whatever it was. I just think you can get players out of the portal. I don't know you're going to get dominant offensive and defensive linemen out of the portal. I think those guys are going to leave FCS more than they're going to come to FCS. And that has the potential to sort of even things out, and just really maybe stop a team from being as dominant as NDSU once was.
Yeah, there's potential for that. A team that gets hot, in the transfer portal, and everything just clicks. I mean, the last 2 seasons I've had Northern Arizona fans, ask me, what do you think of our team? Could we make the playoffs? Because last year NAU brought in like 22 FBS transfers, and this offseason it's like 17 FBS transfers. And I dug into these numbers last year of the FCS teams that brought in the most FBS transfers. How much did they improve? And most of them, their record kind of stayed the same. Like I think Alabama A&M brought in like 25 FBS transfers, and their fans were saying, okay, we're going to be one of the top FCS teams because we have all this Power 4 talent coming in, Power 5 at the time. They went from like 3-8 to 4-7 or something like that. There are some teams that have a drastic improvement because of transfers, but it's just so hard to know. I mean, Murray State has like 20 FBS transfers coming in this offseason. How good are they going to be? I don't know. If everything clicks, they could potentially be really good, or it could be a Missouri State situation from a couple of years ago where the locker room just kind of felt a little divided there. So that could potentially even some things out, but I think just kind of like what I talked about earlier, we're going to see teams rise up, but they're going to fall back pretty rapidly. I mean, you look at 2 seasons ago, Samford, William and Mary, Holy Cross all made the quarterfinals in 22. None of them made the playoffs at all in last season. And so there's people that rise pretty high and then they fall back. And so I think it's the programs that kind of have that tradition and funding in place that are consistently going to be at the top.
Right. And I always go back to the Southern Conference because I think it was East Tennessee State, I think 3 years ago, had their best team ever, a senior-laden squad. They got to the quarterfinals, came to Fargo, NDSU sleepwalked through 4 quarters and still beat them by 3 or 4 touchdowns. East Tennessee State just dropped off the map the last 2 years. Samford a couple of years ago, same thing. They had a couple of transfers, but they also had a very solid senior-laden program. Samford came up here. NDSU beat them 36-7 or whatever, sleptwalked through that game. Samford last year was just, again, average, and they are what they are. I would suspect Furman this year, like you referenced earlier, they're fine, but I don't know if they're going to be a semifinal type team or quarterfinal type team that's going to challenge Montana this year. And so that's sort of what you're talking about, that you're going to have a team rise up, because conferences have seen that. Nicholls State a few years ago in 2017, 2018, Nicholls State had a senior-laden team with their 5th-year quarterback, and they ran through the Southland and they came up to Fargo for the quarters, and NDSU beat them by 3 touchdowns or whatever it was. And so there's always going to be those teams. I just wonder if anybody else can sustain it. And I financially, I don't know that they can in this current environment. Everything is so nuts right now in college athletics with the money that, the North Dakota States and South Dakota States are going to keep getting richer. And I don't know that that's going to change for Nicholls State or Samford,
Yeah.
Or Villanova.
Right.
Villanova's a basketball school. Trust me, Villanova men's basketball is going to have everything it needs every single year, every day of every year. The football team, I don't know, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, people forget that Maine made the semifinals in 2018, and the offseason topic, maybe Maine can be that next CAA power. Then I don't think it's made the playoffs since. So, we've talked a lot about, what needs to happen for there to be less top heaviness. And usually the answer is, we need other programs across the FCS to invest more in their football program. But it's easy to say, just invest more, but it's also, what's the return on investment? Like when South Dakota State invests a ton of money into football and they win a national title, they see a good ROI on that because they're selling all their suites and season tickets and merchandise. If UIW pumps a bunch of more money into football and they make a run to the semifinals, like are they going to get that money back because they're in San Antonio and they're kind of lost in the shuffle there? So it's easy for me and other people to say other teams need to invest more in FCS football, but regionally, either they don't want to because there's maybe more money in mid-major hoops, or they don't have the internal or external support to do so. Like Chattanooga has very strong tradition, pretty passionate fan base, but it's not, a fervent fan base like South Dakota State or North Dakota State or the Montanas. And so would Chattanooga like to fund football and treat football similar to Montana? Yes, but where is that money, coming from to do so? And so I think what we've seen, going back to the first topic, is we've seen programs that take FCS or take football very seriously. Most of those have moved up. And now we're at a point where the 4 remaining teams that take football the most seriously, they haven't moved up because of reasons most listeners should know, because of where they're located. And so that's just, we're kind of in that weird point of the FCS where all the other top programs have moved up, but now the main 4 are kind of stuck in the FCS for the foreseeable future. And I don't know any other programs besides maybe Tarleton State who can just fund things and like those top 4 programs. And like NDSU and Montana State, South Dakota State, like they look and act and walk and talk like an FBS program.
Mm-hmm.
And all the other 126 FCS teams look and act and walk and talk like FCS programs. So that's where the top heaviness obviously comes from.
Correct. What do you think of Missouri State, by the way, moving up to FBS? If anybody listening to this has ever heard me before or read anything I've written, you know that I have been feverishly cheerleading North Dakota State to get to FBS somehow, some way, to the point that a year or two ago, I think I wrote that NDSU just needs to just go to Conference USA and say, screw it, and just go, even though it's not a great conference for NDSU necessarily and all that. But Missouri State, a team that has had very little success in FCS football ever, really, but has a nice, I've been there many, many times covering North Dakota State, has a nice campus, has terrific facilities for baseball and basketball. Football, not so much, but that doesn't matter anymore at the lower levels of FBS. I mean, Springfield, Missouri is a town metro that's bigger than Fargo-Moorhead, I believe, by 20,000 people. It's in an area that you should be able to get recruits. It's almost a southerny type of feel to that part of Missouri, southwestern Missouri. And so you're St. Louis and Memphis and those types of areas, you should be able to get some SEC drop downs in that area if that's what you need, if you want to go that route. But Missouri State took a Conference USA invite. They're going. I applaud them. I know a lot of people are questioning why they would spend $5 million to move up when the landscape might change again anyway. But I said, they control their own fate. Why wait for somebody else? Why wait for anybody else to make your decisions for you? Why not just go when you can? And then if things work out later on, they work out later on. Your thoughts on Missouri State going FBS?
Yeah, I did a story on just kind of rambling different thoughts, no flow to it. It's basically just bullet point of just like random thoughts on Missouri State's move. And, again, going back to the beginning, I thought I had a pretty balanced approach to it, but some Missouri State fans and some Conference USA fans just kind of focused on the negatives. Like, oh, of course the FCS guy is ripping on Missouri State. But what I said was, from a positive perspective, I said Missouri State is smart, in this move. I think if you, as most listeners know, you need an invite and all that. You need interest from an FBS conference. And if you get that invite and you've done all your feasibility, studies and third-party studies or whatever, and you can make it work, I think it's smart, to make that jump. And so I said that the move was smart from Missouri State. I also said that, people will ask, if you're not successful in the FCS, why go FBS? And I said, well, Missouri State is already stuck in the FCS mud. They're not going anywhere. Maybe this FBS move kind of reignites the students and the alum and the local corporate sponsors and all that. And this is kind of the shot in the arm for Missouri State to improve as a football program. And if they suck in the FBS, oh well, they sucked in the FCS anyways. So that was kind of the positive spin, or not even a spin, the positive side I had on it. I also said, and this is where I made Missouri State and Conference USA fans mad, I said Missouri State has been irrelevant in the FCS for the most part, besides a couple of seasons in the early 2020s. This doesn't move the needle for the FCS. This doesn't hurt the FCS at all, in my opinion. Like losing James Madison, I was like, God, that sucks. That really sucks. Jacksonville State, Sam Houston, not as much, but it was still, man, that sucks. Kennesaw State, not as much, but it was still that stinks for the FCS. Delaware
Because
was
Kennesaw State had potential. It seemed like because they were in at the time. That's what I said was like, well, they're kind of moving on to the schools that aren't even good, but have the potential to be good. And that's kind of okay. Kennesaw State, we're kind of waiting for them to get better, and now they're just gone because they're in Atlanta.
Yeah, so Kennesaw like wasn't awful like a James Madison or like a Delaware too. Was like, oh man, that's a tough blow for the FCS. But Kennesaw was still kind of like Jacksonville State and Sam Houston. Like, oh, that's a tough one for the FCS. Missouri State, I was kind of just like, all right, whatever. I personally, my first thought was, and I'm being serious, my first thought was, thank God it wasn't Tarleton, because if I had to choose who does the FCS lose, Missouri State or Tarleton, I would say the FBS can have Missouri State because I think Tarleton has massive potential. So this one didn't really move the needle for me, especially too because I think we all saw it coming, so it wasn't like a surprise or anything. I just didn't think the Missouri State move, while smart on their end to just get into that boat, I just don't think it frankly matters a whole lot for the FCS landscape to lose Missouri State compared to the other ones that the FCS has lost.
No, I agree with that. I mean, they just didn't. I'll throw this hot take at you though. I'm going to have this in my tip sheet column, which by the way, my tip sheet column inspired you to do the what's that? Now the name escapes me. The
FCS Daily Dose.
FCS Daily Dose. Yes.
Yep.
But my hot take is that Missouri State is going to be better in FBS football faster than Sam Houston will be. And that's just based on, and neither of them are going to be, a
James
Madison type of thing at all. But I've been to both communities. I've seen both campuses. And Missouri State, in terms of FBS, just has way more potential in terms of I think its location, even though it's not in Texas and Sam Houston is, and in terms of its local business community and some of the businesses that are in Springfield and the surrounding area, and just in terms of the campus and the facilities that are in place, Missouri State is light years ahead of Sam Houston in those areas. Sam Houston it's not in Houston, folks, by the way. Sam Houston State is not in Houston. It is an hour north of Houston. And Huntsville, I think the biggest employer in Huntsville is Walmart, or the state prison that's across the street from Sam Houston State's campus. And the facilities at Sam Houston are not good. They've been talking about how they're going to have to spend $65 million or whatever to upgrade the football stadium. They're never going to raise $65 million at Sam Houston. It's just not going to happen. And so I think Missouri State actually has a better chance of being, a 7-5, 8-4 type team in FBS faster than Sam Houston. Your thoughts?
I think that's fair. Definitely. I mean, Missouri State they have a, and when I say I guess I should say Group of Five, not FBS, because they don't have an Alabama field, but they have a Group of Five field to them.
Yeah, I should say group. Yeah. I should say Group of Five too. You're right. That's a better way of putting it than FBS. Neither are going to be players on the national scene,
right?
But in Group of Five, I think Missouri State has better potential in Conference USA.
Yeah, and I think Missouri State just, I haven't been on the campus, but, obviously you've seen pictures, and, the stadium too is a fine stadium. I mean, it looks like a Group of Five program, whereas Sam Houston, does not. Kennesaw State definitely does not. Now they're in in the Atlanta area, a huge student population, which helps, which is basically, paying for all their programs. When you have 40,000 students and you're charging them each X amount of dollars, that helps things a lot. But Kennesaw State's stadium itself is tiny, so it doesn't look like an FBS or a Group of Five program, and that's why, I've either tweeted it or I wrote it or both. I said the fact that Sam Houston is in the same subdivision as Alabama, I don't know if that's more or less ridiculous than North Dakota State and Montana being in the same conference or in the same subdivision as Duquesne and Mercyhurst. Like, it's just right. Both are equally ridiculous, which is why hopefully that middle subdivision happens with the Power Four. They're not going to split away from the NCAA because we have that settlement now, and so the NCAA tournament is a part of that. So I don't think we're going to see a Power Four split from the NCAA, but I think there is a chance that there could be a new Division I subdivision where to be in that subdivision you need to revenue share X amount of millions of dollars, and then that creates the Group of Five, maybe the top of the FCS merger that we've been talking about for years. Then the FCS can still play Division I football. I think that is the most ideal outcome, is just to have teams land in 3 different football subdivisions where they belong, and not have Mercyhurst and Dayton playing in the same subdivision as Montana, and Missouri State playing in the same subdivision as Ohio State.
Right. So let's talk about that a little bit. Matt Zimmer, a colleague and works the same company I do at Sioux Falls Live, covers South Dakota State and has for a long, long time. Wrote a column over the weekend, and I'm not fully sure why I was a part of it in Colpack. My colleague here at the Forum was a part of it, but we were. And Matt made the case, as he's done before, that South Dakota State is just fine where they're at. They don't need to be looking around. Justin Sell, the athletic director, has said, we're not going to be reactive. We're fine. And Matt made the case that, the Jackrabbits should be happy trying to win more national championships in FCS. And he kind of, put out there that, the Fargo media or those that cover NDSU are chomping at the bit for NDSU to go FBS, and sort of kind of some of the same bullet points about, well, why would you want to play a December bowl game that doesn't mean anything? All of which is, we've rehashed this a million times. When I read it, Sam, my reaction is what it's always is when this comes up, because there seems to be this undercurrent in FCS that, NDSU is stuck in FCS and good, screw them. They should be stuck in FCS because they're so arrogant and yada, yada, yada. But my thought was, it's okay if South Dakota State wants to stay in FCS. It's also okay if NDSU, or at least some of the people at NDSU, would like to move up if the opportunity is there. I don't know that things have to be viewed through the same lens in both communities. Matt made a couple of points that, South Dakota State now is becoming a national brand, and they're sending players to the NFL, and people are finally catching on, and they're filling up the stadium down there. And when I read that, I went, that's all they've been the best program in FCS for the last 2 years. But North Dakota State went through that 10 years ago. And so, and that's not a knock on South Dakota State, because they caught NDSU, and for now they've passed them. But NDSU was here in 2013, where it was all new, it was all fresh. People were lining up to buy season tickets. You were around at that point. You know what it was like. People, they couldn't buy tickets fast enough. Game day came here in 2013, became a national brand. And so, but NDSU kept on winning. And naturally, at about 2017 or 2018, you could see the enthusiasm start to wane. Not just me, not just Dom Izzo, but the fan base became just sort of bored. Not totally. They still draw more than most. But they just sort of went, okay, what's the next step? And so I don't know if people understand that, unless you're here, people will ask you, they've asked me, how can you be bored with winning championships? It's like, because they won 9 of them. And I don't know what's next. I think you wrote that, okay, so what if NDSU wins 2 of the next 5? Well, okay, so then they win number 10 and number 11. Okay, it's great. And I'm not knocking it, good for them if they do. But why is it different than the other 9? From a fan base and a media standpoint, we've seen it all before. And so I think it's okay for South Dakota State to be where they are and say, we're happy, we're kicking ass, great. But it's also okay for NDSU, or at least, again, some at NDSU, to say, what else is out there? And can we somehow get there if the opportunity presents itself? It doesn't have to be either or. It can be both, and both can be happy. right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my thought. What's yours?
Yeah. One thing you mentioned of like, what's the difference for NDSU if they win a 10th and 11th and all that? Because NDSU is in an interesting spot where the more I feel like this is fair to say, the more national titles NDSU wins, the less meaningful they get for NDSU fans. Now, if NDSU wins a national title this year, like for the players and the coaches, like Cam Miller is going to be just as happy as Brock Jensen was in 2013 for winning a national title. But from a fan base, like each new national title is just gonna be like, all right, we won another one. Like it's not meaningless, but it kind of means, a little less with each one. So that's where NDSU is in an interesting spot. But you said something about South Dakota State is where they're at now is where NDSU was 10 years ago, and I think that's true. I think that's reality. And I could see that in Frisco. Like South Dakota State fans in Frisco remind me of NDSU fans in Frisco in 2013 and 2014. And in fact, when 2 seasons ago, when NDSU and South Dakota State were both in Frisco, being a fair and down the middle journalist, I went to a South Dakota State bar and I went to a North Dakota State bar. Just to equal it out there, and to kind of get the scene. And the NDSU bar was kind of just sitting around the tables, eating, drinking, kind of just casually talking. The South Dakota State bar was partying. I can't believe we're here. We're at the national championship game. This is awesome. Let's chant, swear words and stuff like that. So there is a difference there.
Buck the Fison. Buck the Fison.
Exactly. So I think there is kind of a middle ground there. Like I know you, or I think it was Jeff Kolpak wrote that, like NDSU, like right now, like just do whatever you need to do, kick down the FBS door, make all the calls you can to reach, to get to the FBS. I understand that, but I just don't think there's any interest in any FBS conferences in NDSU, right now. But I think maybe NDSU should still be maybe a little more aggressive than what they have been. And then on the flip side, on the South Dakota State side, I disagree with just, we're not going to react to anything. Like if we keep on having success, things will just work out where they, however they work out. I disagree with that slightly because I do think you have to be a little forward thinking. And I do think South Dakota State is forward thinking, and I'm pretty sure Montana State, they're being forward thinking too right now, where they're comfortable in the FCS, but they know changes are coming. And so, there's, I don't know how high of a probability, but there's a chance that the Mountain West loses 4, 5, 6 teams a year from now. If the Mountain West calls Montana State and says, hey, would you be interested in coming to the Mountain West? Montana State's not going to be like, oh, give us a few weeks. We need to, hire a third party firm and kind of give a feasibility study, seeing if we could do it. Like they're probably already working on that right now just to see. So, and I think South Dakota State is probably doing the same. I don't think they're just being like, whatever, we're fine in the FCS. We're, whatever happens. I think they're at least talking in the background of saying, if things shake out and there's a new middle subdivision, or we get an invite from the Mountain West, can we make it work? Where's that money coming from? Can some of our corporate sponsors bump up their money a little bit? Can we bump up student fees? Let's talk to the school board. Can we bump up student fees? No. Okay. Where else would that money coming from? I don't know this for sure. I'm guessing they're at least talking about that. And so I don't think South Dakota State necessarily is just not being reactive at all and just, kind of letting things play out how they play out. I think they are at least talking about it a little bit. They're not in the same boat as NDSU as far as the want to go FBS. I don't think they're there quite yet.
Yeah. And I they would be foolish if they weren't preparing behind the scenes. Right. I mean, and I don't know how much preparing they have to do because South Dakota State's athletic program is about as good as it gets right now. I mean, they are dominating the Missouri Valley Football Conference. They win championships all over the place in the Summit League. They're building new facilities every year, it seems like. So I don't know what, prep they would have to do other than, I think you always want to be in a position where if the phone call comes, again, and this is the old model where if, a phone call comes, you just want to be able to say yes right there. I've been told that multiple times by multiple athletic directors at different schools that the thing you have to do is that when the phone rings and the question is asked, you can't say what you just said and you go, well, let us talk about it for a while. That's not the way it's. You have to say yes or no. Maybe the answer is no too. If the MAC calls South Dakota State and the MAC says, we just want you, South Dakota State. We don't want anybody else. We don't want North Dakota State. The answer from South Dakota State might be, no, we're good. Thanks. We'll wait for something better. James Madison did that years ago with the Sun Belt Conference. The Sun Belt, when it was a much different conference, called James Madison and said, you want to be part of our league? And James Madison said, no, we're good where we are for now. And it all worked out for him in the end. And again, you're not Matt Zimmer, and I can get him on the phone anytime I want. But I thought maybe a better take, instead of talking about North Dakota State and South Dakota State and they're happy, I think a better take would have been South Dakota State has to prepare. I mean, again, if you win 4 more championships in the next 5 years and you're South Dakota State, by the time you get to the 7th one, those of us here in Fargo know what that's like. And by the 7th one, everybody's kind of going, yeah, Frisco again. Let's go to Scruffy Duffy's and get drunk. I mean, it just, trust me on all of this. I've been here through all of them. And there's a lot different feel about NDSU football today than there was 10 years ago. And the same thing is going to happen at South Dakota State. It just will. Everything that we've seen out of South Dakota State has already happened in Fargo. And so I thought, South Dakota State's got to be ready to go. I assume that they are, even though they're not going to maybe say so publicly, but because they want to enjoy it and they can't tell their fan base, you know what, FCS sucks. We don't want to be in it anymore.
Yeah.
And North Dakota State hasn't said that. I have said that, not North Dakota State. But SDSU is not going to come out and say, yeah, FCS is going down the drain, so we don't want to be here anymore. And if we do win a championship, who cares? So I get that they can't say that, but they have to look to the future.
And South Dakota State fans, Montana State fans, they're all very knowledgeable about the FCS. They're all very engaging with FCS national content. And so I've heard from all 3 of those fan bases, and obviously NDSU too. I've heard this plenty of just like the watering down of the FCS. Like I think even the most passionate FCS follower realizes that the subdivision is getting watered down. It's not in an absolute terrible spot, and there's no good teams out there. I think one thing to keep in mind is just because a team isn't close to beating North Dakota State, they're still good by normal FCS standards. And so I don't think there's only 4 good teams and everyone else sucks. I still think there's still good FCS teams out there. They're just not at a national title level. But SDSU and Montana State fans realize that the FCS is getting watered down and that they don't look and act like a lot of other FCS programs. And, it's a little less than NDSU fans, but I do hear them saying that. And I saw a pretty funny meme from, I can't remember what account it was. It was a Montana account, a fan account, and it was like a Ferrari in the middle of a trailer park or something like that. And the caption was, the Montana schools in the Big Sky Conference. So they know that they don't look like other teams, in the Big Sky Conference. So I think the realization is there that the FCS just isn't what it used to be. Now, winning a national title for South Dakota State means the world to those fans. I mean, Montana, you were there, Mike. I'm pretty sure you were in Missoula last year. That scene after Montana beat NDSU to go to the national championship game, that was one of the best days of Montana fans' lives. I've heard them say that Montana State fans, when they beat South Dakota State in the semifinals a few seasons ago, I saw a tweet saying, this is one of the most memorable days of my life. So it still means a ton for them to make the national title game, to win a national championship would mean the world for the Montana schools. But again, if for the next 5 years, it's the same 4 teams in the semifinals and the championship game, that's going to be really fun. But by the time year 6 hits, it's going to be okay, this is maybe not even year 6, maybe year 4, it's going to be all right, kind of the same story over and over again. And how many more trips to Frisco can Montana State make before they're going, it was fun the first few times, but now it's just kind of losing its luster.
And by the way, I was not in Missoula. I was at a Broadway show in New York City game. Yeah. But I was in Bozeman the 2 weeks before that when NDSU beat. Right. Yeah. That was, hey, I'm harsh on the FCS, but the atmosphere in Bozeman was utterly fantastic. And that game meant everything to the Bobcats, the school, the fans. I went out for lunch the day before with a big booster and did a story on him. And I was
Yeah,
But
that's the story I was thinking of when you talked to
I mean that
about
it was,
the
and
FBS.
they were ready. They wanted so bad to beat NDSU, so bad they wanted to beat NDSU, and when it didn't happen, it was just a crushing defeat. So it still matters greatly. And I know that the scene in Missoula after that game, it was like they won the Super Bowl, and that's anytime you can knock off NDSU and you get to do it at home in front of 25,000 people. Terrific college football atmosphere. I had the former Bison coach, Matt Entz, I talked to after he took the USC job, and he just said, he goes, Mike, I know you weren't out in Missoula, but that was an unbelievable atmosphere. It was so much fun. And he goes, and the kids had fun. We lost the game. That sucks. But the kids recognized what a great atmosphere to play in. I mean, just what a memorable day, even though we came out on the wrong end. We were a play away. And so, that part of FCS is just fine. But as you said, when that game happens 5 years in a row, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I mean, yep, been there, done that.
Yep. And that's peak FCS, that scene in Missoula. And I remember tweeting that too about the 2021 semifinals when South Dakota State went to Montana State. That was a great game. James Madison went to North Dakota State. That was a great game in the semifinals. Like that is peak FCS. But again, that's the top 1% of the FCS.
Or less.
And then you go
exactly.
to then you watch a playoff game, at some of these other schools, and it's like, that's not too exciting.
Yep. So okay, last thing, I got to let you go. The WAC is apparently falling apart because we're expecting Stephen F. Austin to go to the Southland here at some point this week. I wrote a column last week in my tip sheet that I talked to a few people, and the belief is that the WAC is likely going to fall apart at some point, and that's going to send the rest of the Texas schools back to the Southland, and leave the Utah schools sort of out on an island by themselves, and they could end up being fodder for the Summit League / the Missouri Valley Football Conference. What does it mean if this WAC conference, which they reconstituted a few years ago and said they were going to, we're going FBS? It was all a joke, but what does it mean for FCS if the WAC falls apart? Does it matter? I mean, the teams are still going to be in FCS; they just won't be in the same league. From a Fargo arrogant standpoint, getting Southern Utah and Utah Tech in the Valley, if that was to happen, would do nothing for me in terms of my relentless beating the drum for a move up for NDSU. But what happens to the ASUN? What happens to the WAC? What happens to the Southland? What does it all mean if it happens in the big picture?
Yeah. Originally the ASUN and the WAC, originally they were going to form two new FCS football playing conferences. Right away, they had a good group of schools. Jacksonville State, Eastern Kentucky, Central Arkansas, Kennesaw, North Alabama, Stephen F. Austin, Sam Houston, Abilene Christian, Lamar, Tarleton, and Utah Tech. And so it was a good group of schools, but just the timing was awful because a short while later, Sam Houston and Jacksonville State went to the FBS. Kennesaw later followed. Lamar returned to the Southland after 1 year. UIW, I think people forget this, but UIW accepted an invite to the WAC. And then a week before joining the WAC, they said, no, we're actually going to stay in the Southland. Right. So it all kind of collapsed relatively quickly for the ASUN and the WAC. It sounds like SFA to the Southland is a done deal. Abilene Christian might follow. What does Tarleton do after that? And that leaves the two Utah schools kind of on an island. I don't know exactly what they prefer to do, whether it's to rebuild the WAC somehow, some way, whether it be to just, instead of United Athletic Conference, maybe they just absorb those remaining WAC teams into the ASUN, because the ASUN still has a decent amount of teams left in that one. I think they have six teams, in the ASUN part of it. So I'm not really sure what the fallout is going to be. Those two Utah schools going to the Missouri Valley Football Conference would be interesting, but I don't know I guess I don't know why that move would make sense for the Missouri Valley Football Conference, unless, well, I
Well,
guess it would
the
be
Summit
to maybe
League. The Summit League
the
is the
Summit League
connection
part of it.
because
Yeah, I was just going to say
the
that.
Summit League needs baseball and soccer teams, and
Boost up those numbers.
there's
Yeah.
talk. The web we weave is that Patty Viverito is going to retire from the Missouri Valley Football Conference commissioner spot, supposedly in the next year. The Dakota schools liked Josh Fenton, who's the commissioner of the Summit League, and there's been talk of Summit League football sort of becoming a thing with the Summit League team. So if the two Utah schools were in the Summit League, then they could be absorbed into the reconstituted Summit League football. And then, what happens to the Valley? A lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces, but that's sort of the talk of what in this region, what might happen. And the Summit League is the key there because they would like to have the Utah teams, I think.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see, but I would prefer there not to be more FCS conferences because when the ASUN and the WAC formed, two new conferences, it looked like the auto bids were going to go from 10 to 12. And so that's why for a little bit, the Big Sky and the Valley commissioners and the CAA commissioner wanted to expand the playoff bracket because more conferences means more auto bids, which means less at-large bids. And so I would like the number of auto bid conferences to stay at 10. And so, if that means, the WAC or the United Athletic Conference just totally disappears, and now there's ASUN football, so it kind of stays at 10. I would be fine with that. I don't know if I would love, hypothetically speaking, the Summit League forming a football conference, and then there's still the Missouri Valley Football Conference somehow. I don't know if that would morph into one or those would be separate. I don't know if I would be a big fan of that happening because I would just add one more football conference. So I don't know. It just seems like there's going to be a lot of FCS realignments in the next year, whether it's the CAA membership not being too thrilled with the new CAA members. We have, the United Athletic Conference, there's going to be movement there. I talked about the Mountain West stuff. Could they possibly get poached by the Pac-2? It just seems like there's going to be a lot of movements coming, or there could be that new subdivision as well. Just
right.
A lot of movement seems to be coming in. I don't know exactly how it'll play out, but I guess it'll be pretty interesting to follow.
We didn't even get to the CAA. I mean, the CAA, like 3 years ago, was like a power conference in the FCS, and now all the good teams want out because some not so good teams along the South Atlantic coast got let in, and the conference makeup just completely changed. And so Richmond is now out of the CAA, going to the Northeast Conference. The Patriot League.
Yep.
League. And then the word on the street is that they're not the only ones that are going to leave. There's also going to be other traditional CAA schools that don't like what's going on, as you referenced, and they might also go to the Patriot League. So the Patriot League is going to get better in football, presumably, and the CAA will continue to get worse in football, presumably. So it's just odd.
Yeah,
the whole realignment thing has totally thrown everything on its head.
Yeah, the CAA, has definitely gotten watered down. You can't replace a James Madison, and you can't replace a Delaware either. But right. I think a big reason why Delaware left was because they saw the members, coming in and just said, this is not the CAA that that we like. And the CAA tried to replace James Madison in numbers. They added Campbell, Hampton, Monmouth, North Carolina A&T, and Bryant. I thought the North Carolina A&T edition was really good. For a bit there, NC A&T was rolling. They won numerous Celebration Bowls. They had like 3 FBS wins in a row, like 3 or 4 years of draft picks in a row. So I thought that was a good ad, but they've since fallen off. Monmouth was a pretty good ad. They were a big South power, but Hampton, Campbell, Bryant was the latest one. That is kind of when everyone went, what is the CAA doing? Yeah. And I think that's when Delaware said, okay, we need to get out of here. Richmond wasn't a fan of the new additions. And so I don't, Villanova possibly could leave as well because they're a football only member of the CAA. So it's easier for them to leave. So that is certainly something to monitor of what is going on in the CAA, which used to be a power conference, and there's still like New Hampshire, has great tradition in the FCS, but they've since fallen off. So there's still good program names in the CAA. It's just most of them, like William and Mary and New Hampshire, they've fallen off pretty big time here recently.
All right, we're almost at an hour. Sam, thank you. Appreciate you coming on. We'll do it again, okay? Always like the conversation.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for having me.
All right. Sam Herder from Hero Sports. You can, of course, follow him on Twitter. Read his daily dose. It has jottings and speculation and random thoughts from Sam's head on FCS football, so it's all good. Thanks for listening, folks, to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. We appreciate you, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely.